Islam is a problem, a serious problem, I think. That's why I joined the job. Nick people and to get in scraps.
Someone saying Islam is a problem, that Somalis are scum, and another saying foreigners should be shot. That's not audio from a far-right rally, but from serving Met police officers. An undercover reporter infiltrated Charing Cross police station for 6 months. And what he found was racist and misogynistic behaviour from a handful of male officers, openly, in plain sight. So what does their boss think about it?
It's ghastly, it's reprehensible. Clearly there's racism in there, there's misogyny, there's relishing in using excess force. It's completely unacceptable, and I'm sure members of the public watching it will be upset and angry, as we are.
How is this still happening in 2025? And what does this do to public confidence in the police? Welcome to the Crime Agents. Welcome back to this special episode of the Crime Agents with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Basu.
So Neil, we've scrambled you on your holiday. I'm sorry about that, but we think that this is a very serious story that we need to cover. In case anyone hasn't seen it, Panorama did a undercover investigation where they sent a undercover reporter into Charing Cross police station, which of course has been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. He spent time as a civilian member of the staff in the custody suite. And what he found was officers openly being racist and misogynistic. And then there was footage of certain members of the station heading to the pub, and that's where the language and behaviour got even worse. You had officers using language that you would hear at a far-right rally. I mean, one officer expressing support for Tommy Robinson. This is devastating for the Met, isn't it, Neil?
Well, it is. I mean, don't worry about scrambling me back from holiday. You and I will apologise to Nina at some point. But thank you for giving me 12 hours to calm down. I mean, I've listened to a lot of the reportage this morning.
Yeah.
I knew this was coming because of the leak a couple of weeks ago about the fact that Panorama were going to produce this show. So I knew what had happened at Charing Cross, and we were pretty appalled then. But I've seen the BBC News clips, some of which we're going to use in this podcast, and they're sickening. You know, I introduced myself in this podcast as the ex-cop Neil Basu because I'm proud of being an ex-cop. Not so much today. I mean, when you look at people like that and what people like that do to the reputation of policing, it's absolutely horrific. And we've run out of hyperbole to describe disgust this morning. I've heard every person who's spoken about this go to different levels of disgust. Let me tell you, as a 30-year serving police officer, particularly one who finished as a chief constable, every chief constable in this country of my vintage shares some sense of pain and complicity today for living through an era where effectively our culture has reached this point. I cannot emphasize strongly enough that something radical has to change. This is not just a couple of individuals at Charing Cross. It's a team of people who seem to be able to thrive in an environment where they felt pretty much protected, certainly by their sergeant. That's a horrific piece of leadership right there, or lack of leadership right there. So I could rant on, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, I can see it in your face, Neil. You're angry. So that sergeant you're talking about, that's a custody sergeant called Sergeant Joe McIlvenny. I mean, I was in shock when I was seeing what I was seeing, because this is the type of thing, and it was this type of behaviour that you would expect or you heard of 2 decades ago, never mind in this day and age. He was openly misogynistic. He was talking about masturbating in front of his female colleagues. He was explaining sexual encounters he had with some women. One, he said, was so fat she had 2 pussies. And then he was telling other colleagues that he was getting sexual pleasure from having his nipples played with. And you know, basically doing the action of masturbating and then laughing. And then his male colleagues laughing with him. This same sergeant, there was 2 clips of when women were complaining about being raped. And he clearly just immediately dismissed them. And then he started taking the piss out of one, saying, well, who did it? Did he have green hair? Was it an Oompa Loompa? I mean, this is behaviour that I think the public will find utterly utterly disgusting.
Yeah, am I right in saying that his sexual comments were made in front of female officers and detention staff as well?
Exactly.
Which is a classic piece of misogyny and a power play and utter bullying and sexist conduct of the worst kind of any human being, let alone a serving police officer who has been promoted in our profession for allegedly their leadership skills. And you talk about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I was a custody sergeant in one of the busiest police stations in the capital, Brixton, at the time when we brought in closed circuit television and audio recording in custody suites, not just to improve the behavior of prisoners, but of course to improve the behavior of police officers. And the people who were king in that custody suite was the custody sergeant.
Yeah.
They reinforced all of the standards for everybody who appeared in front of them, and they were there for the welfare and detention of some of the most vulnerable people in society. No matter how violent or conflicting they were, the idea was the custody sergeant was there to protect everybody, their standards, their reputation, and the way they behaved. That was 30 years ago, and I was incredibly proud of that job. It's where I learned to be a leader of younger officers. That sergeant is an utter disgrace.
Yes.
And I know the Federation have come out and said, you know, they shouldn't be tried by media. The Federation have made what I would describe as a typically equivocal National Federation statement, saying we'll have to wait for the inquiry, we'll have to, even when you are presented with such flagrant, clear abuse of professional standards in policing, they shouldn't be so equivocal. They should be absolutely behind the commissioner and say these people need to be fast-tracked and out of the system as quickly as possible. And I hope the Metropolitan Police Federation is not considering funding their legal, if they are serving and paying members of the Federation, it's about time the Federation just said, look, we're not supporting people who behave like this when they are faced with this kind of, as the Commissioner says, incontrovertible evidence.
We'll get on to a little bit about what's going to happen next later, but I just want to keep talking about what you saw in that police station. And one of the really shocking things is this was happening in the police station. This wasn't happening in the pub. We'll get onto the pub later, but this sergeant, there was one moment where a female suspect came into the station. She was wearing a tight leather dress, and he started ogling her through the CCTV. He then started saying to his colleagues, "Oh, I'd pay for that in a strip club," type of thing. He then, and that wasn't enough, he then stopped what he was doing, went out, and then you could see him on CCTV openly just ogling her. It was astonishing. And then he starts talking to his other colleagues, and he's basically saying to them, don't say anything about what's happening in this. There was a moment where a suspect was pretty roughly treated in one of the suites, and then he was boasting about giving one of them a dig, i.e. a punch. And then after that, he took this undercover reporter who was new to the team and just said, "Oh, listen, don't say anything about this, because down the line that could be taken out of context, and you know we don't want to be in the naughty step here." So this is someone who was at the top of this unit, top of this team, and his behavior is just spreading amongst them, and they're all falling into place. And if you've got someone like
that's what happens in all corrupt teams, Andy, is the person with the weight on the team. Sometimes it's not the sergeant, sometimes it's a peer, but the person with the weight on the team will set a standard for the team, and people will just follow them like sheep.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, leadership is getting people to follow you. If you're a corrupt leader, it's getting people to be corrupted.
Yeah.
And you see it very clearly in this. And even if you hadn't heard the audio of that sergeant talking, the fact that on CCTV he went to supervise the search of a female prisoner would have been a complete red flag to anybody. If they were watching these videos, if they were dip sampling videos, if they had taken reports of what was happening at Charing Cross seriously, I still don't know who these whistleblowers were. They are very brave, but why did they feel they couldn't go to their own leaders, their own professional standards department, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner? Why did they feel they had to go to the BBC? That's the really clear issue of cultural problem here, is that they don't trust their safety in their own institution, in their own profession. And that is appalling when you watch the behaviour of these people at Charing Cross.
And then, other than the misogyny, you then have officers openly boasting about violence. You have one officer saying he joined the force because he wants to be able to legally scrap, and that he's a Bermondsey lad. So what does anyone expect? And then there's another clip of someone, and I'm going to play this for you, Neil, where someone talks about what he does when someone comes into the station and gets their fingerprints done.
Taking fingerprints by force, because I'm like, give me your fingerprints, but no, I'm going to break your fingers if you don't give them to me. My mates were going, so how'd you take them by force? And I went, we grabbed their 2 fingers and I put them down. And they went, yeah, and what happens if they don't? I said, we grab the other 2 fingers and you pull really hard and it snaps the tendon, and they go.
Yeah, even the BBC didn't use that clip on their website. It was probably too inflammatory. But Radio 4 played it this morning, and my God. I mean, if those clips on the BBC News site weren't bad enough, that particular... I mean, I've long said that the trouble with policing is it both attracts and creates bullies, people who want to abuse their power. And what you're seeing in these clips from this brilliant piece of undercover journalism, what you're seeing is absolutely that coming true, that we have both recruited and gone on to create in our culture people who like to abuse their authority, abuse their power, bully people, whether they're women, whether they're people of colour, whether they're vulnerable people. They like to abuse their power and be violent. And we've got to stop recruiting people like that. And we've got to start being much more aggressive about how we spot them when they are becoming that way.
Right.
I've heard what the Commissioner has said. The Commissioner is using all kinds of tactics that we use together in terrorism to do that. My question is, why didn't it work in this case? He moved hundreds of people from our old counter-terrorism command into the Director of Professional Standards. We did a line of duty episode, Andy, and I know that the anti-corruption command of the Metropolitan Police, I know the person who ran it. It was very effective. It got good reviews by HMI CFRS. It's there precisely to capture and expose not just corrupt cops working for organised crime, but for corrupt cops who are ruining the reputation of the Metropolitan Police. It needs to step up.
Yeah, the timing couldn't be worse. The Met are in the middle of the biggest anti-corruption operation in the history of policing. They've already got rid of 1,500 officers. Clearly, this shows that there is way more work to be done. You were kind of getting the sense that they had gotten rid of the bad apples. Clearly not the case here. Here's another officer who we're going to talk about. This is the guy who openly expresses support for Tommy Robinson. He took the undercover reporter to the pub, and here's what he said about Muslims.
I've seen too many Islamics committing crimes. Their way of life is not the correct way of life.
And referring to cases he says he's dealt with.
Either put a bullet through his head or deport him.
Yeah, I mean, this is particularly horrific for me, as a child who born in the 60s and grew up in the 70s with the National Front. And my colleagues who joined policing in the 80s would say, their colleagues would wear National Front badges. This is a guy who would clearly quite happily wear an EDL badge, quite happily be a BNP member, quite happily be a member of a far-right group. And as you said, is using language you'd expect to find when you're reporting in the middle of a far-right rally. Disgraceful. And obviously, he said enough in that one clip, in my view, to be immediately dismissed from policing. And I hope he is.
Yeah.
And I hope that does send a message. And you used the expression of bad apples. We got sort of very annoyed. The public got very annoyed at Chief Constable saying bad apples or a few wrong uns, because that's not what this is. It would be easy to dismiss this as a few individuals we haven't captured yet. But these are people who know right from wrong, because they're hiding their true feelings because they know it's going to cost them their jobs, but seem to have existed in plain sight. I mean, Rory Gibb, the journalist, was in there for 6 or 7 months. I mean, this is not like these people were having too much trouble behaving like this on duty and off duty and getting away with it. And that points to some much more fundamental problem with culture in policing that the Commissioner himself has described as systemic and a problem not of individuals but of the culture. And we'll talk about what he's trying to do about that, I'm sure, surely.
You know what? Let's take a little breather there, Neil. I can see you actually need one.
I need
I
one.
don't think I've ever seen you so angry. So we're going to
No.
be talking about what next, what happens next, and we're also going to be hearing from another officer who said this.
Seen too many Islamics committing crimes.
Fucking either put a bullet through his head or deport him.
I hear you, man.
Because we're paying for it. He was an overstayer. That was. He was an overstayer.
So many, though, isn't there?
Honestly, just... Yeah.
What? Where are you going there?
A revolver. Revolver would be so nice.
This was probably the most shocking bit of the documentary, where an officer called PC Phil Nielsen, he went to the pub with the undercover reporter. It looked like he had, at least 5 pints while they were filming. And then some of the stuff he was coming out with was just beyond belief.
Do you ever see any issues with Ukrainians?
Nah.
Exactly. So I don't mind them, because they're coming over here to work and get away with it. Now, people coming from all Middle Eastern, they're just scum.
It just beggars belief, Neil, that this is a serving police officer.
So thank you for the break, by the way, because I think I was beginning to hyperventilate. Quite dangerous at my age. So, and then you play me a clip like that and I start all over again. I don't know what it is. There's something about, I've said it before, people join policing sometimes because they want to abuse their powers. I'm trying to hang on to a tiny little bit of a silver lining in Rory Gibbs' reportage, which was about, he used a clip of 2 officers clearly trying to take care of a very vulnerable person.
Yeah.
He used the expression, I witnessed in my 7 months, hundreds of officers trying to do the right thing in what is a very difficult job. That's brilliant to hear, because I've said it many times. The media, and now I'm in that profession, will often make you believe that it's the whole of policing. It's many more people than you think. Whereas I've always criticised chief constables for saying it's just a few, the bad apples or the wrong uns. The reality is if Mark Rowley is correct, and I believe him because I'm a friend of his, and I think he's got the utmost integrity and he wouldn't lie about it. He's had 1,400 good cops come forward and report bad cops. That's 4% of his 33,000 cops have come forward to actually report. That number needs to go up dramatically. But what it means is the 1,500 he's got rid of, which are much more than ever in the history of policing, without a doubt, that is a substantially greater number than, you remember our Line of Duty episode, and we were talking about Paul Condon declaring in the 1990s it was 1 or 2% of his officers who were corrupt. You're already up to 5%. That's an extraordinary number for the public to sit back and just take on the chin and say, thanks very much for doing a good job, Mark. They will not believe him until somebody independent comes in and tests what he's saying. Now, those independent people, and we heard those people who haven't listened to Sace, the brilliant Sace from the London Policing Board, who was on our podcast about stop and search just yesterday. They need to understand that London Policing Board is there to absolutely check that Mark Rowley is doing what he says he's been doing on behalf of the mayor. And we've heard a strong statement from the mayor today, but we've also heard from the chair of the General London Authority, Councillor Ahmed, who's there to hold the mayor to account for what he's doing with his oversight of the mayor. And she sounds very unconvinced. So somebody has got to come in, and I think that's Louise Casey Mark II. Louise is too busy, I understand that, but it's almost exactly 2 years to the day that the London Policing Board was set up to do precisely this, to check that things were changing in the Met. Mark says they're changing. I actually believe him. I don't believe anybody else could be doing more to try and change it, except for one fundamental thing that Mark is missing, which is his inability to accept institutional racism as a phrase. He says words don't matter. They do.
When you look at that programme, this is what, to be fair to him, he came on the airwaves this morning. He spoke to Nick Ferrari. This is what he said.
Now, following the publication of the Casey report in 2023, you refused to describe the force as institutionally misogynistic, racist and homophobic. Are you ready to change your mind?
the institution of the Met is bearing down on all these problems at the moment, and that's what hence the results and things I said to you there. The most important thing is I recognise, and I've been really clear, that there are deep systemic issues that go back over decades, that not just failures in regulations, failures in leadership, failures in culture, failures in vetting, a whole pattern of things that have created a too comfortable environment that has created the volume of problem that we've been rooting out. But we're showing as an organisation how determined we are. And the fact I've got 1,400 men and women who've stepped forward in recent years to report their colleagues shows how collectively determined we are to deal with this.
So there you go, Neil. He's still not accepting that the force is institutionally racist. How can he not, after seeing this? And if he doesn't, is he the right man for the job? Should he even be in that role?
Well, I think Zoe Billingham has said that it's problematic for him, is the expression she's used. Mark Rowley's not stupid. He knows this is an existential moment for him. It exactly mirrors the loss of Cressida Dick's job around Charing Cross when the 2021 report into the Charing Cross crime squad, not a custody squad, a different squad inside Charing Cross, was reported on.
Do you think he could lose his job? Do you think he could lose his job?
No, I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. And I think there's a lot of misreporting today about Charing Cross. That Charing Cross incident, that crime squad, was found to be operating corruptly the way they were operating in 2017, before Cressida Dick even came back to policing. It was the investigation by the IOPC that took so many years, and by the time it was revealed in 2021, it was too late for the Commissioner to do anything about it because they'd already been through a process. And there's no double jeopardy in that case. You can't retry them for the same crime. That got no truck with the mayor of the, Sadiq of that time, who said, basically, I have no confidence in your plan to change it. And she lost her job. She resigned before the mayor could come out and basically call a vote of no confidence in her, or that he had no confidence. Now, Mark is facing exactly the same problem with the mayor today. So the mayor and the London Policing Board are going to have to be absolutely convinced that Mark Rowley has a plan to accelerate what he's started and to finish the job and to change the culture. Now, do I think Mark Rowley can change the culture of Metropolitan Policing, which has existed since 1829 and has been institutionally prejudiced for all of that time? Do I think he can fix it even in his full 5-year term? No, I don't. But he could set a platform for his successor. He shouldn't lose his job now, because he is the one commissioner since Sir Robert Mark in the 70s who's made this a number one priority. And he has got rid of lots of corrupt and bad officers. He's proved it's not individuals. But his refusal to use the language of institutional prejudice, institutional racism, does he not understand? I mean, he was accused of lacking empathy by one of the people who was listening to his commentary this morning. And unfortunately, he does come across trying to be, I bet he's furious, but he's trying to be restrained and professional and say what he's doing. But in doing that and not acknowledging institutional, he is telling every black and brown person who lives off the back of the 1999 institutional racism definition by Macpherson that their views don't matter. He will have listened to Palm Sandhu, he will have listened to Councillor Ahmed, he would have listened to Mina Smallman this morning, and hopefully he will listen to me. You are making a mistake. Every black or brown person I know, inside and outside of the police, including officers who served in the 80s and like me in the 90s and onwards, every single one of us, it means something to us. It might not mean anything to you, and you might think it's going to make the rest of your front lines think that they're all being called racist. I think you are underestimating your front line, including the 1,400 who've already refused to stand by and watch and have reported their colleagues. I think the vast majority of your officers understand that they're not prejudiced and that it's the people like this Charing Cross squad that need to be out and not existing in a culture that a refusal to acknowledge that term allows to persist.
But the thing is, Neil, if we all know that the Commissioner is a very stubborn man, if he's not willing to accept this, then how can it be fixed?
All chiefs are stubborn. I tell you what annoyed me most today is we've heard nothing from the National Police Chiefs Council chair, nothing from Andy Cook, Sir Andy Cook, the head of HMIC FRS, nothing from the College of Policing, my friend Andy March, who's an incredible cop, but we haven't heard anything from the most senior voices in policing.
Well, because they're stunned.
Well, They shouldn't be stunned. They're professionals. They should get on with the critical incident that's now facing them. And they shouldn't also cut the Metropolitan Police out and hang them out to dry, because this is a policing problem. There isn't something unique about London's cops or about Charing Cross cops.
Yeah.
Don't forget, Charing Cross is part of AW, it's called. The radio phonetic is Alpha Whiskey, which is rather ironic when you consider some of the behaviour you've seen.
Yeah.
But effectively, that has over 2,500 cops in that area, of which 9 have now been suspended. But, it's a bellwether for the Met. It's such a huge part of the Met. It's like the Met is a bellwether for the rest of policing, because it's 1 in 4 of every police officer. Well, Charing Cross is that for the Met. It's the biggest part of the individual part of the Met. So there will be all kinds of different cultures, as we saw in the Crime Squad in 2017. But the point is that, policing as a profession, it's called out its lack of vetting after the horror that was Wayne Couzens was allowed into the job, and David Carrick, the serial rapist, was allowed into the job. It's called vetting out. Mark says that is much firmer.
Yeah.
They're refusing twice as many people at the front door. That's great. He's doing more, with professional standards. People are clearly afraid of professional standards. I was at a dinner where a very senior chief constable last week said the pendulum had swung too far and officers were now afraid to act.
Right.
And I said to him in private afterwards, do you think the pendulum swung too far? Because I don't think it swung far enough. What about Charing Cross, knowing this program was coming out? And he was nodding his head going, well, I mean, chief officers and the most senior people in this profession have got to start calling it out. The new Home Secretary has got to make Andy Cook make the race action plan and diversity a major issue for policing going forward. Instead, we are celebrating chief constables who say diversity has nothing to do with them. I mean, this is the result.
So, Neil, it's obviously I've been, as the program went out, my phone was just lighting up with police officers, all fuming at what they were seeing. And in fact,
Good.
Yeah, I know, right? So, in fact, one female officer, she told me that the female officers in Charing Cross Police Station, they organised a watch party last night to watch it because they hated, especially that custody sergeant, but they hated the officers involved so much. They were all celebrating last night that this had been exposed. That's extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, you remember me telling you when we were doing my book that my introduction to professional standards and corruption in the police was when my own detective sergeant colleague was arrested on the crime squad at Brixton, and nobody knew. But his colleague at Streatham, the DC at Streatham, when he was arrested, everyone said we'd known he was a wrong 'un for years, but nobody did anything about it. It's okay having parties after the event. How did those people? That sergeant is a long-serving sergeant.
25 years.
The terrible thing, yeah. So how has he survived for 25 years with views like that? Don't get me wrong. We've all served with people like that. I am as culpable as anyone else for not calling out people like that.
Yeah.
Every chief constable who's sitting there in their oak panelled offices is sitting there with somewhere between 25 and 30 years experience, will have served alongside an officer like that, and we haven't done enough to shut them out. And I'll leave you with one. Let me just finish my rant, then you can close our show. But the listen again to Sace in that brilliant interview we did with him the other day on Stop and Search, when he said the problem, he says nothing's changed in the last 5 years he's been training cops on Stop and Search. In other words, he's basically saying there's still a racism problem, there's still a complete inability to cope with the black community. We've heard these kind of police officers in the BBC footage by that very brave journalist saying all kinds of things. It's not just the black community, these people are just prejudiced. And Sace's big point, which I think is absolutely true, is you can't stop this in individual organisations unless you stop it in society. You can't kick it out of the police or off the football terraces or out of banks or out of any other institution until we start changing society. And this is my rather depressing point to leave you with. Society is getting worse. You were at the rally 2 weeks ago. Society is getting worse. And I shudder to think, when I look at the age and service of some of those cops in this programme, who we have recruited in the 10 years since it's got worse. What are they going to do next?
Yeah, well, Neil, do you know what? We're going to leave it there, and I'm going to let you get back to your holiday. That was some absolute top-class ranting, I've got to say. I don't think I've ever seen you like that.
Yeah, I apologise to our listener because
No.
your blood pressure's probably gone through the roof as well. But I'm about to do about 200 laps of a pool.
Oh, good. Well, listen, enjoy the rest of your holiday, Neil. Hopefully we won't bother you again, but we may do. You know how this works now. Listen, thanks so much for listening to The Crime Agents with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, ex-cop Neil Basu.
That's it from us. Goodbye.
The Crime Agents.